Welcome back. As far as gripping real-life crime thrillers go, this one has got everything. A mutiny, a psychopath, and a brutal mass murder. It's a 400-year-old mystery, so it's also Australia's greatest cold case. It starts in 1629, when the Dutch sailing ship Batavia strikes a tiny atoll off the West Australian coast near Geraldton. Almost 300 passengers and crew survive the shipwreck, but over the next few months, as they wait to be rescued, more than 100 of them are slaughtered. For centuries, their bodies lay buried, the story forgotten. But now, the Batavia is a major archaeological project between Australia and the Netherlands, and every day, macabre new discoveries are being dug up. Well before Captain Cook sailed up the east coast of Australia, ancient mariners called this West Australian island chain the Abrolhos, Portuguese for open your eyes, a warning to all sailors to look out for the perilous reefs. But so brutal and bloody is the history of what took place on one tiny atoll here, now known as Beacon Island. The truth lay buried for centuries.
It's still a story I think most people don't know.
Why do you think it's been almost hidden in that way?
You know, it's a hard story to get your head around, and it doesn't fit with kind of those great stories, you know, the Captain Cooks and explorers and all of that stuff. We're dealing with a psychopath, some pretty horrible events. You know, there's nothing like it in Dutch history or Australian history.
No less than 125 men, women and children died on this tiny island in just 3 months. To this day, it remains Australia's first and biggest mass murder.
I'm thinking it's interesting that the burials all over here were all facing the other direction. We're clearly in a graveyard, but they're kind of all been buried in different ways.
Dr. Al Patterson leads a team of Dutch and Australian archaeologists finally unearthing the bloody story of the Batavia.
That's the proximal tibia, really.
Incredibly, nearly 400 years later, they are still discovering whole skeletons, macabre remnants from the ship's maiden voyage, which ended in shipwreck, mutiny, and then murder.
That's broken in, yeah.
Look.
What do you think motivated the murders here?
I reckon what was happening in many ways was an end game for, you know, the mutineers. You know, I think that they probably saw this as the last place that they were going to be, and they just turned the world upside down.
Real life Lord of the Flies stuff.
Yeah, totally Lord of the Flies.
In 1628, the Batavia, with over 300 people on board, set out from Holland, bound for the Dutch colony, also called Batavia, now known as Jakarta. But for reasons still unknown, she sailed badly off course and slammed into the Abrolhos Islands, 60 kilometres west of the mainland and what is now the city of Geraldton. That's Morning Reef, where the Batavia ran aground on the 4th of June, 1629. 40 people drowned just trying to make it to this island. For the survivors who did get here, being shipwrecked was the least of their worries. You see, the ship's commander, Francisco Pelsart, took a longboat and sailed north to Jakarta to get help. He left a bloke called Geronimus Cornelius in charge, and he turned out to be a complete psychopath. As a Dutch national, what do you think of Cornelius?
What a creep. Yeah, he was very slick. He was very good in selling his story, but there was definitely a darkness underneath there.
So he was influential, but he was an influential madman.
That's right, yeah.
Wendy van Dijvenvoort is a Dutch maritime archaeologist who has moved to Australia to work on the Batavia and other Dutch wrecks on the west coast. The Batavia wasn't the only shipwreck, but it's by far the most notorious. Wendy, what's the most important part of this work for you?
There's a little bit of an honour to those people who died here. get their story told, give them a little bit back of being left behind in this place at the end of the earth.
So when do you see yourself as honouring the victims by working on this project?
Yeah, I do. And especially when you think about the moms and the children who are here, because most of the women, practically all the children were killed here. And you just, if you reflect that a little bit back to your own life and you see your own children, you're like, oh, what an awful place to die.
A few weeks after the shipwreck, Cornelius ordered his fellow mutineers to murder any potential opponents and those considered a drain on supplies. So the strong, the weak, the old were slaughtered, while some women were kept as sexual slaves.
The first murders were people that they believed would pose a threat. So obviously strong males, someone that could potentially, stand up and offer some resistance.
Physical anthropologist Dr. Dan Franklin is, for want of a better term, a bone detective.
It's very well preserved, isn't it?
It is, and again, once you get away from the water, you're in a beach sand environment with a lot of coral and shell, and that gives a very alkaline soil, and that's actually quite good. It favours bone preservation. So I mean, this skeleton, being almost 400 years old, is in fantastic condition.
In his lab at the University of Western Australia lie the excavated remains of some Batavia victims. Part of Dan's work is to find out how they lived and died, so they can become more than just bones in the sand.
This person would have been, what, quite a strong, powerful sort of individual?
Yeah, the one thing we can really tell quite clearly from this skeleton is that it is a male individual. We're very confident of that. Probably someone in their 20s, but very, very powerful. The bones are very robust. There's a lot of markings that indicate quite strong muscles.
Where's the head?
So the head was actually recovered in 1964, and it's actually been on display in the Geraldton Museum.
The skull in Geraldton has the most gruesome sharp weapon trauma of any of the Batavia victims found. Meanwhile, on Beacon Island, the search goes on for more remains.
This one's human.
Definitely human?
That's why we have these guys here to tell us, but you're saying it's part of the hand.
So this is definitely human. It's a metacarpal.
Ambika Flavel is another physical anthropologist on the project.
I can tell that this is a fifth, so one of the little finger on the right hand.
So, Dan, what do you reckon? Those bodies we saw on your table, would that match or not?
I don't think it belongs to them. We'd have to confirm it, but it's clearly an adult, and it's not someone who's small either. It's a decent-sized little finger.
So it could be an entirely new body. I mean, it sounds terrible, doesn't it? Because we're dealing with dead people, but it's from an academic point of view, it is exciting.
You know, that comes up every time we find something as well. You know, horrible things happen to these individuals. You know, they clearly were victims. So I guess the archaeology allows us to kind of get their story told as well. So there is, you know, it is exciting.
We're on to it.
Yeah, we'll find the next one.
Yep, in situ.
All the action's over here.
Take it.
See?
Wow.
Happy birthday!
Thank you!
Well done.
Femur, tibia, in situ.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
So we were chasing his toes. We were
Nearly 400 years after the carnage, another Batavia victim is discovered.
trying to call us the B team.
Well done, team.
It takes hours for Ambika and Dan to carefully unearth skeleton number 14.
We'll have a tag to meet
cranial fragments is about 18.
In this darkest and earliest European chapter in our history, it's worth pointing out too, it's more than a story of pure evil. There's a hero as well. A soldier called Webby Hayes.
We don't know too much about him really, but we certainly know him through this as someone who was able to bring together a group of men and then other survivors and actually organise a resistance, you know, a military man.
He was responsible for saving many lives, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Before the slaughter began, the evil Cornelius dispatched Hayes and a small team of other men here to the nearby West Wallaby Island to look for food and water.
Cornelius deliberately put them out here on this high island as they knew it. You know, sent them out here, left them without a boat. You know, he thought, presumably, it was far enough away for them to basically be isolated and less of a problem to him.
He was really trying to get rid of them.
You know, they were given instructions. When you find water, which they did, put up a signal fire, which they did, and it was ignored.
Hayes and his people would have known.
They knew something was going on. And then, obviously, news came in through people, makeshift rafts, making their way to the island and starting to tell of the horror.
When some of the survivors made it over here and raised the alarm about the slaughter that was going on at Beacon Island, Webby Hayes knew it was only a matter of time before Cornelius and his henchmen came for them. So they built this pretty basic shelter out of stone slabs to try to prepare for the inevitable battle. It was to become the first European structure on Australian soil and an everlasting monument to good against evil. In a case of incredible timing, 3 months after the shipwreck, there was a full-pitched battle going on when the Batavia's commander, Pelsart, arrived back on a rescue ship, the Sardam.
And they all see the Sardam arrive, and then they race for the vessel. Webby Hayes in one boat, mutineers in the other, and they arrive pretty well at the same time, and then Pelsart has to sort it all out.
So they were trying to get to the rescue ship first to tell their side of the story.
Exactly.
To blame the other one.
Hayes gets there first.
Thank goodness. In another Australian first, there was a trial, and 7 of the mutineers were sentenced to hang. Cornelius had both hands chiselled off before they strung him up.
During the trials, he showed no remorse. You know, he would exhibit, I guess, the traits of a psychopath. Someone who clearly had no morality.
So right to the end, he...
No remorse.
None at all?
None.
How many survivors were there at the end of the entire episode?
Well, something like just over 80, nearly 90 make it back to Jakarta, so to Batavia.
Out of everybody?
Out of everybody, out of the 340 thereabout who probably came here.
Gee, it's a lot of death and destruction, isn't it? Out on Morning Reef, only a cannon and some anchors remain of the Batavia. They discovered the wreck in 1963, and part of the hull now stands in Perth's Shipwrecks Museum, along with one of the first complete skeletons recovered from Beacon Island. No one knows for sure how many more are buried out there. On our dig, one more body was unearthed. It really brings it home, doesn't it, when you see it like this?
Yeah, I mean, you get a sense of a person who has been covered up for 400 years, nearly 400 years, and you just have this moment, which is it's an amazing thing to actually find this, and every time it feels the same. You know, I mean, we know so much about this story, and yet here's someone who was there and was part of that extraordinary story of the Batavia, and so had been covered up ever since. So, yeah, you get a real sense of being face to face with history.